Alright, today I want to cover a topic that has been on my peripherals for quite some time and now seemed like the right time to finally dive in. The subject is agendas. Normally I focus primarily on gaming, and that will certainly be a large part of today's video as well, but in order to holistically cover the topic, I'll need to expand outward and analyze other forms of entertainment, such as films and television, to fully articulate my position. The idea is pretty simple. I've encountered a great many times with increasing frequency over recent months the vocal position that political and social agendas ruin whatever they touch. I myself have echoed a similar sentiment, with a few key differences, most importantly revolving around certain video game releases and the idea that a shoehorned political or social narrative designed to shame or modify their audience's individual beliefs is unneeded, unwanted, and ultimately damaging to the title. Today, however, I would like to modify that position and clarify the stance for a number of different reasons. I will maintain that having a social or political narrative present in media purely as a bludgeon to try and alter the audience's beliefs or behavior is almost always a total disaster. There is an even more important distinction as well, where these narratives are created and layered into the immediate detriment of the story itself or the surrounding content, and in such a case they have absolutely no defensible value and should categorically not exist in the material. However, the position I wish to take today is that social and political agendas can be done right and in such a way as to broaden user perspectives while, generally speaking, enhancing both the content they are designed for and the overall narrative. To be very clear here, can be done right and are done right are two entirely separate distinctions. On average, political and social agendas in video games and other media are done so horribly right now, they actually have a reverse effect of polarizing viewers against the position they wish to promote. There is a very complicated explanation for this, which I'll dive into later on, but the basic premise is that social and political agendas in games, television, and other media can be done in such a way as to result in a net positive, even if the individual viewer disagrees with their stance. But the unfortunate reality is that they are weaponized, invasive, divisive, and antagonistic by design, which ultimately results in both the content being ruined and an even greater negative response from the users the agenda is aimed at condemning. To fully explain, I will primarily focus on three different examples here. The first is Flack from Borderlands 3, the second is a character named Taylor Mason from a show called Billions, and the third is the recent X-Men movie Dark Phoenix. Each of these examples shows a different method of handling social and political agendas. One is, in my opinion, well-crafted and effective. The other two are antagonistic, juvenile, ineffectual, and embarrassing. First up, let's talk about Flack. Flack is a gender-neutral robot identifying as they/them, I believe, in the Borderlands 3 universe that was the center point for a pre-release batch of controversy as a result of Gearbox's chosen methodology. The agenda here is pretty obvious. Expand on the character diversity within the Borderlands 3 universe in a way that has been done many times before by a wide selection of games, and has become increasingly common over the years, with the goal of being more inclusive. By itself, this might have been an entirely meaningless addition. To be fully blunt here, very few people care at all what the sexual orientation of a video game character is, least of all a robot that has gender-neutral pronouns. It can be a good thing for those that do care about it, but by and large, it's a non-factor. The reason Flack is a point of note for this particular video is because Gearbox, on the official Borderlands 3 forums, began banning players for using improper pronouns. This, of course, turned into a meme, and the joke began to take on a life of its own. Soon, there was a full-on brigade of trolls that would purposefully take to the forums, use the wrong identifier, and get banned just to see if it was really true or what the actual process was. But to get to that point, there was a very particular set of circumstances. Initially, there was a very real and sizable chunk of the community that simply did not know or did not understand the framework behind Flack, and the intended neutrality of this fictional robot's gender. Not that many players read character lore or even fully pay attention to it. If they do, an even smaller chunk will internalize the sexuality from that lore and then say things other than generalities in a forum post. A definitive group of players simply did not know that this was a character to whom they must modify their language, and defaulted to easy or subconscious norms of saying guys or him, and they were banned as a direct result of that. This is the primary driving catalyst behind the increased attention and the users purposefully misidentifying the robot. Flack was created as a bludgeon. The motivation was punishment and confrontation. The pursued tactic was not one of education, it was not one of tolerance, it was rather something along the lines of call this robot the pronouns that we set up for it. If you do not, if you misunderstand, if you simply don't know, who cares, do it or you will be banned. This is a case study in exactly what not to do. The utilization of obscure lore to push character terminology that many will simply never see or care about, and then coming down with totally unreasonable moderation and punishments against all those non-conforming, is idiocy of the highest order that only serves to polarize a player base and decrease the respect for the pronouns or agenda or message that Gearbox wishes to so angrily enforce. Flack is the perfect example of an invasive and detrimental social agenda, but on the opposite side of that same spectrum is Billions. Billions is a television show about a billionaire named Bobby Axelrod. The show follows a number of different characters that are individually interesting, but one in particular stands out for our purpose today. Taylor Mason is an analyst who identifies as they and them, who enters the show after a couple of seasons. The difference here is that Taylor Mason is a compelling character. As a plot mover, Taylor makes critical decisions, highly intelligent maneuvers that enhance the overall narrative. They are responsible for large amounts of money. They impress the audience and other characters alike with their intellect, poise, and critical thinking, all the while turning the focus from their pronouns to them as an individual. Taylor Mason demands respect for being an impressive person, not because they shriek and whine about their pronouns when these pronouns are used improperly. To go even further, there are a couple of deliberate instances in which Taylor is addressed improperly, one in particular from a character named Dollar Bill Stern, who comes across as a very masculine individual. The response, however, was not what has now become all too common. Taylor Mason shrugs this off with a simple correction and proceeds to continue down their own path of maximum efficiency, progress above all things, and individual success. The result is that the audience wants to respect Taylor. I found myself making an actual effort to use the proper pronouns when describing the show to others because I respected the character that had been portrayed for who they actually were. Taylor Mason as a fictional character is more than the simple pronouns that describe them. They were not some pathetic, devolving mess of shrieking and whining every time someone used language or generalizations they had been raised on for decades. Rather than creating a narrative that bludgeons the viewer by insulting, demeaning, and condemning their lack of understanding or lack of effort to conform, the show simply presents a scenario, tells a story, tells it extremely well, and hopes that along the way the viewer might be entertained while also witnessing broader perspectives. Storytelling itself is invaluable. A good story can present information, it can change perspectives, and it can have far-reaching effects. A bad story can anger its audience, create divisive emotions, and hinder the very message it seeks to portray. Flack was an example of bad storytelling. A character was used as a weapon to shame and attack, while Taylor Mason and Billions were able to include the exact same subject matter without attacking anyone. When seeking to modify how others behave, there is a right and a wrong way to do so. The modern sensitivity culture that we see amplified by social media is an example of the wrong way. You have situations like this.
Quick point of privilege. Quick point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Guys, first of all, James Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. I just want to say, can we please keep the chatter to a minimum? I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload. There's a lot of whispering and chatter going on. It's making it very difficult for me to focus. Please, can we just, I know we're all fresh and ready to go, but can we please just keep the chatter to a minimum? It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronouns?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
When the sum total of who you are as a human being is distilled all the way down to the simple usage of a pronoun that deviates from the rest of human history and decades of peer upbringing, and your only response is to quiver and shake in the face of anyone who either intentionally or unintentionally deviates from this arbitrary self-proclaimed identifier, you are crafting an atmosphere of zero credibility. If, however, you are able to cultivate a social atmosphere in which you command respect and admiration through your actions and poise as a peer-to-peer human being, instead of rolling their eyes in the face of your progressive agenda, viewers, friends, and audience members will actively seek to support you. Nowadays, you have expectations that people not clap during applause because clapping is too abrasive and jarring, so instead you get a bunch of lunatics wagging their fingers around or snapping, while the infantile sensitivity clowns claim that being called a snowflake damages their mental health. You have scenarios where the simple and unintentional usage of the word guys as a generality, which can be learned and ingrained through decades of playground upbringing and social structure, is met with outrage and frantic alarm. This is the wrong way to further a social or political agenda. The last example for today is X-Men Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix is the worst performing box office X-Men movie of all time. The film is a catastrophic failure both commercially and critically, which can be attributed to a wide variety of factors, but a prominent one among them is its tactical pursuit of a social agenda. At one point, Mystique, who is not even remotely close to the relative strength and intelligence of many other X-Men on the team, makes a crack about how it should be X-women because the girls are always saving the boys, and there is definitive malice in her voice when she does this. This is yet another classic example of condemnation and denouncement preemptively weaponized against a section of the media's own audience for no actual reason other than anger. This was an exchange purely designed to insult. It had no entertainment value, it provided no narrative enhancement, it was a social and political jab against perceived opposition that had been imagined and manufactured in the minds of whoever conceived this particular scene. Much like Flak in Borderlands 3, this was an instance where an agenda was placed into a piece of content because of moral indignation. The desire was not to change minds or positively impact perception, it was to find catharsis by insulting or punishing those that they disagree with. To go further down the rabbit hole of manufactured outrage, we can examine the alarmist approach to a gender wage gap. The prevailing narrative has been hashed and rehashed that there is a severe wage gap and women earn a substantial portion less per dollar than men. But synchronized directly alongside this social agenda and message, there are condemnations of men for not earning enough money. The accusation is leveled that broke men are harming the marriage economy and that women are struggling to find men who make more than them. If men are earning more than women, it's oppressive to women. When women are earning more than men, it's oppressive to women. This contradiction is born because the social agenda of pay gap reform is an ill-defined and convoluted disguise. The immediate and prevailing desire is to attack and demean, which is an endeavor that is almost entirely void of logic. The authors of this particular type of article simply want to be upset. They want to communicate their frustration, whatever the real root cause may be, I am not sure in this particular instance, and so they retrofit anything and everything that they can with the goal of making it clear that they dislike something or someone. In this case, a distaste for men in general. To be totally honest, I think there may be some merit to the argument that men's values have shifted in recent years, for the worse for that matter, but to me it's painfully obvious that this is a direct result of societal feminist norms. When you get screamed at, no matter what you do, you kinda stop trying as hard. This brings us back to the right and the wrong way to include social and political agendas in gaming, television, or other forms of media. If the desire is to bludgeon your audience into submission by screaming in their face that they are wrong for being who they are and need to be forcefully modified to better fit your own subjective worldview, that is a wrong way. If the goal is to gain personal satisfaction for oneself or a particular group of viewers at the expense of another demographic by insulting and demeaning them for, again, failing to have an aligning social or political view, that is yet another example of the wrong way to include these themes. If, however, the goal is to build a compelling narrative that includes these controversial themes in a way that adds to the development of characters, while still allowing those characters to stand on their own as interesting individuals rather than a vehicle to shove a specific ideology into the face of your viewers, that can be done well. Agendas can be interwoven into games or movies or whatever else for that matter. It is possible to do, and when properly done, even when someone disagrees with that agenda itself, the value of the surrounding work does not need to be diminished. Unfortunately, that is not a common occurrence. The overwhelming majority of inclusive politics is now being used as a way to attack any non-conforming viewer, or worse yet, crammed in for marketing points to the detriment of the work as a whole. As long as such a practice continues and remains normal, social and political agendas will more often than not be met with failure and ridicule for their inability to tactically persuade an audience. On the most basic of levels, agendas in gaming or television are inevitable. They are simply yet another storytelling mechanic, but the way they are used in modern society is embarrassing, it is creatively bankrupt, it is patronizing, and it will go nowhere as long as those in charge are allowed to believe that they are anything other than prejudicial and ignorant. Truly skilled narrative professionals are able to use all of the tools at their disposal to the benefit of the artistic vision. Amateur, outraged, and intellectually inferior creators are the ones who lack the expertise to properly utilize those same tools, and thus they are responsible for creative works that reek of moral superiority based on subjective beliefs, which contaminates and pollutes whatever subject matter they are sadly allowed to control. That's it for today. As it stands, we will continue to see stories, games, movies, shows, whatever else it may be, ruined by progressive politics, but when faced with the accusation that such politics always ruin the material that they are included within, I have to disagree with that. They can be done right. They can be impactful and beneficial. They just aren't right now. If you want to support, there are links down below. In particular, I'm trying to grow the Twitter page, so consider following there if you have any interest. Also Patreon, merch, etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.